when someone has passed away, okay, before we can even decide to distribute their clothes and their watches and shoes and stuff like that, we need to have that period of mourning, right? Some cultures it's 30 days, some cultures it's 6 months. Different strokes for different cultures, right? And after that period, okay, then sesiyabuya sigeza amagalamvu, sigeza izandla, sigeza isinyama. That's when people can remove some of their black clothing.
Yes.
As family members, isdwedwe la siyasikhipha, and then you can burn that, right? And then obviously, except the mother or the matriarch of the home, she would keep wearing isdwedwe in a Zulu context, right?
Yeah, because that can be a year.
Yeah, so
of wearing black, and the family does something different. This is what you're saying.
So if your husband passes away, it can be a year of wearing black. It should be a year of wearing black. But obviously, look, we live in different times, so it's kind of, it can become a negotiation with the family. You know, the family, some families say, after 6 months, it's okay. You can stop wearing black. It's not a problem, right? But it is only after umuntu uyabuyiswa. In other words, it is only after you've done the tombstone for that particular individual do you distribute and give out their clothes.
Hang on, wait. You know what? See, I mean, that can be years and years and years because of budgetary constraints. As you say, the dynamism of culture. We're in this modern world where, can that really be a set rule?
Yes, it is a set rule, right? Even ubuyisa umuntu, the year is a stipulated like guideline, right? It's a guideline really. But a year can come, and then umuntu can come to one of the family members in a dream and say, no, not yet. I want another 6 months. 6 months comes, and then they say, I want another 6 months.
So if you don't have the budget for a tombstone?
If you don't have the budget, then you must make the budget. Then you can't give out the clothing.
Interesting.
Because the only time we can give away your possessions is when we have completely made sure that you have moved on to the afterlife, right? And as a family, right, we have also moved past this particular point, because that period of mourning is for psychologically and mentally coming to grips with the death of the individual. Okay. So you need to be in that position before I see Pabi wearing my mom's Gucci shoes. So there are lots of us who are wearing your mom's Gucci shoes and there's no tombstone. What are the repercussions? They need to go back and rectify it. Abaqale ngembuzi, yokuxolisa ukuthi protocol wasn't followed. Then, if inkomo is what they use, or a sheep, or a goat, that's fine. Then they can do the tombstone. Because you don't just erect a tombstone. Kunomsebenzi that you need to do for a tombstone, right? I'm not going to tell people what animal to use because different cultures use different animals. You always say so, yeah. Right? Yeah. But the most important thing is you cannot be wearing ingubo, kababwako, or whatever the case may be, but ubabwako akanayo tombstone. All right, so that's point number one. You can send a voice note if you have questions for CM Kize, spiritual advisor, about the idea of inheritance and some of the rites and rituals that need to happen once somebody has passed away. Let's talk about then hierarchy and who is permitted to or entitled to what. Okay, so you see, the difficulty with hierarchy is that ngokwesintu nesiko, right? If my father passes away, my mother would have control of his into, right? My mother and father pass away, it should be my eldest brother. The firstborn. The firstborn. No, the firstborn son. Yes, the firstborn son. But unfortunately in South Africa, there's very few men in some households. Either men leave, or sometimes the eldest brother is actually not in the right headspace and is not mature enough to be the one to actually handle these gifts, right? And actually be the one to take on the possessions, okay? So for me on the TMS this morning, I'm actually not gonna say to you what should be happening. I'm gonna say to you guys, you need to look at who is the most mature, number one, to be the custodian of the family possessions, not the owner. There's a big difference between the words. Break it down. So if I am a custodian, I am responsible for making sure for the upkeep of these things, and I'm responsible for mobilizing the family, whether it be financially, getting any kind of resources for the upkeep of these things and the equal and fair distribution. Because ilifa is there for everybody, right? Yes. So the big mistake that people do with ilifa is they say, fine, to make things fair, because we can't decide on the custodian, let's sell everything and then we split it equally amongst ourselves. when they don't understand that ilifa is supposed to generate more income for everybody else to enjoy in the long term. And then all of you that are benefiting from the income generated from ilifa can then go and not start life on a negative balance. And then you replenish.
Yes, absolutely.
When you are now working and have the finances.
Because, you know, the way I understand it is in the same way that Papa or Mama built the family and continuously brought resources back in for the benefit of everybody, whoever is the custodian of Lifaleu would do the same thing.
Exactly.
Would carry out Papa's wishes.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly that.
So how do we then balance kind of Western thinking with wills and the law, etc., and what our culture is?
You see, this is a very tricky question, right? Because let's take, for instance, the issue of divorce. If I'm here on the morning show saying that divorce is not there, technically speaking, if you and I get married now, we divorce 5 years later, you remarry, okay, and I pass away in 2040, you have cultural rights to come back and say, I'm owed a piece of that pie, right? And that is the reality. So how do we balance it? It's not about the consideration completely of Western law. We need to look at what spiritually is the consequences of denying someone, right, a piece of this, especially when they are blood, right? The biggest mistake that people do with Ilif, and the reason why black generational wealth is not accumulating, right, is because we are creating generational curses, or we are perpetuating them. And what I mean by that is there is infighting with Ilif, right? But the second and most important thing is we cut family members out for reasons which have no spiritual significance.
A generational curse can be perpetuated by family members as a result of getting emotional, breaking people out of the family, cutting them off for, what did you say, spiritually insignificant reasons?
Or reasons that have no spiritual meaning behind it.
Please tell us what that means.
Okay, let's unpack that, right? So culture is tied to spirituality, right? So now that is how you separate culture and imkhuba, which is habit, okay? So if you are going to say that umakoti okanye ingane that's ilongwe, in other words, a child that was conceived in wedlock, but the father is not the biological, was not the husband, right? Should be excluded because one ilongwe or because umakoti is now divorced, okay? What you are doing is nivula umkhok, right? For one, umakoti to never come about. Number two, right? For the families to generate or have more of ingane ezilongwe, right? Because the person that you are discriminating against, right, is the person that is either not going to happen, is the person that's not going to come in more in the family, or the person that's going to happen more frequently. So some families are like, no, but there's no weddings that happen and there's no marriages that happen in this family. And it's like, yeah, because nina kunomakoti like Kyle that was denied a piece of ilifa.
That's very interesting. And I mean, maybe even on like a very, very practical level, that could have been the next Einstein of the family who could have brought wealth back into the family. That could have been the person who could have continued the bloodline in a certain way.
Exactly. But because we think that we don't practice the principles spiritual of culture, culture spiritually, principally, there's no divorce. Right? Spiritually. That means if Watsalong and Yong, regardless of whether or not the child was fathered by me or someone else, so you can't exclude that.
And I see why you're mentioning that, because that becomes, in terms of inheritance, Sia's child who's born in wedlock versus Sia's child who's not born in wedlock. Sia's family, when he passes away, are going to deny that child.
Exactly.
And that becomes a big problem. We've got some voice notes, I believe, that have come through. So let's have a listen to the voice notes that you've sent through. We're talking about inheritance. It is African spirituality on TMS.
Morning, siyamkhiza. Ngine problem enjengale. Impahla zomuntu osedlulile emhlabeni njengobaba singakwazi ukuthi sigcine or sibophe for the whole year because umama mayekhona kuyomele azini isikhathi esingangonyaka na singakwazi ukuthi sihlalise singasebenzi unyaka wonke ngoba silinde ukuthi kufanele size sifake i-tombstone na.
Yeah, that was what I was asking.
yeah.
Can you? Is that for real?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Okay.
Look, different. Amazulu 1 year is when we do a tombstone.
Yeah.
Different cultures do it at another time. But you cannot be wearing impahla zomuntu up until lo muntu ubuyisiwe. Mbuyiseni umuntu. There's a reason why sisebenzisa igama akabuyiswe,
Yeah.
right? Because nithatha izinto zakhe. Sometimes ngisho nemoto as well. Umuntu athi no, idumisa imoto so that the battery doesn't die, but no one can drive it. There are some families. I had a client where they did that, right? They used the car too soon. Yashaya isimoto. They didn't do anything about it. To this day, they all Uber around because not a single one of them can drive. They all crash their cars and ride cars off.
Listen, whichever company is selling tombstones is going to get lots of calls after this conversation because people are going to be like, I haven't got him a tombstone yet, so we'll do that. All right, let's have a listen to another voice note.
Good morning, Sia. Good morning, Pabi. I just want to know what happens in a situation where the person who has passed on wanted to be cremated and they have been cremated. In that sense, there is no tombstone. What happens then? Thank you. Bye.
Yes, yes.
That's another problem with cremation is that there's no tombstone, right? First things first, they're going to have to go to Msamo with imbuzi. Well, imbuzi ezimbili really, right? One, eyokushwele ziphutha as a family that they made the mistake of cremating the person.
Sia.
The other one, ugeza yena, this person, so that they can move on to the afterlife.
But this person has chosen to be cremated. In real life, they've said, "Nah, I'm claustrophobic. Let's come in a casket. I don't want that."
I know. I understand that we choose to be cremated. But remember, what you choose on this side is a principle that you feel. That principle on the other side, right, is a different principle because what's going to happen, okay, one of two things happened. The last client we had, Yena, her father got cremated, and every night she had night sweats, right, to an extent that she had a couple of burns at a time. And then was wafika kubaba sahlola, so I said, why, how did you bury your father? But he, no, we cremated him. So that's one way in which it can happen. The second way is nivula umkhokha for abantu ukuthi bashona ngokushiswa.
Oh my gosh.
Because
Okay.
it's dumas shiswa. So, imbuzi ezimbili, abaxolisa ashwele ziphutha, and then on top of that, bageze ulo that they was cremated, and then after maybe 2, 3, 4 months, then they can do the tombstone.
We're going to have to get your details after because I suspect a lot of people are going to want to come have conversations about how to go about these processes because Sia, a lot of family members will ask for certain things and be quite adamant about certain
Yeah.
things in the living. And so what you're explaining does change the thinking somewhat. And I also want to understand, you know, are we talking about an actual tombstone, the stone itself, or is it about musebezi, the actual ritual that goes with that process?
We're
That's
talking
what
about the ritual
Exactly.
and the tombstone.
And the tombstone.
The tombstone doesn't have to be this massive fancy.
Okay.
It can be a simple one.
It does, yeah. A whole, you know those ones.
Yeah, those elaborate ones.
Whoa.
It doesn't have to be
All
a
right.
statue.
Let's listen to one more voice note. Thank you so much for sending this through.
Good morning. Bengicela ubuza kubhutisiya ngaba amadoda wona ayazila anxibe impahla ezimnyama ngoba soloko ndibona abantu besifazane.
Brilliant question. So this is about the widower, which is the man
Yeah.
whose wife has passed away, because we always talk about the widow, who's the wife whose husband's passed away.
No, naye umuntu wesilisa kumele azile. A husband should be mourning the wife of his passing, right?
Seaparo se setso.
Yena kasigqoki isidwaba, right? He can wear black nje, whether it be a black t-shirt, black jacket, yeah, well, always one of the two, okay? Hence, we say, ukuthi no, after a certain amount of time,
Okay.
I keep it zero.
All right.
biggest,
Yes?
Yeah, I wanted to say that the biggest mistake that men do is people think, they actually encourage men, ukuthi no, umakoti, your wife has passed away. At the funeral, already someone is waiting. So, ukzila applies to men too.
That is a conversation that we have to have very soon. That period of grieving and then remarrying. You're right? I think
Yeah.
it's important to understand from a cultural point of view what that means. Because many of us
Definitely.
dress up nicely to go. No, I'm joking, we don't. Siam Kiza, how do we get hold of you?
For online sessions, I work strictly online. Info@spiritanimals.co.za, or at CMKize on all social medias.
Brilliant. Well, listen, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. You really do get the questions going for CMKize here on TMS. We're taking a short break now.